Hi guys, this is video tutorial for NeutrinoParticles editor. In this tutorial I will continue with EmitterGuide, and in previous one we told about start position, and in this tutorial we will continue with changing position. So I created default effect, and you can see that changing position has 4 different modes, different options. Default one is steady motion, but I will start from the first one, none. In this mode, particles simply don't change their position. If you set path for starting position, you can see that particles stand still. They may rotate, change their size, but they just don't change position. The second mode is move along path. So all particles by default moves by the path, move along the path. You can edit this path. Also, you can change distribution of particles, so you can control how they slide over during their lives over the path. By default, distribution is over particle life. If you click it, you can see that this is a graph where particle life applied on x-axis in range from 0 to 1. It's some kind of normalized life, and it doesn't matter how long particle will live. At 0 point it just born, and in 1 point it dies and lives from 0 to 1. And on y-axis, position on path applied in range from 0 to 1, where 0 is start of the path and 1 is the end. With this graph you can do a lot of interesting things, like you can make non-uniform movement. You can see particles accelerate. Also, particles can move forward and backward. I'll change generation rate to 0.3, so we can see single particle. And now let me change this distribution like this. So particle moves to the end of the path and then moves backward. So you can make any type of movement. Along that path. And this is accelerated there and back again. Another type of distribution on the path is over particle time. It is almost the same, but on x-axis you will have not normalized life from 0 to 1, but lifetime in seconds. Also, there is a checkbox, apply emitter's rotation, which will rotate this path accordingly to current effect rotation. Let me show how it works. Now I will drag the effect, and you can see that path rotates with effect. If you disable this option, path will be directed always in one direction. And again, use it only when you need it, because it costs additional computations. So if you don't plan to rotate your effect, just switch it off. The next mode of changing position is steady motion. It is the default one, and in this mode, when particle is created, it will have a starting velocity vector, and the particle will move accordingly to that vector all its lifetime. Start velocity settings you can see in this group, and start velocity has 4 different modes. By default it's random 3D, but I will start from fixed, the first one. This mode works very similar to point start position, and in this mode you can define three-dimensional value, three-dimensional vector for starting velocity. By default it represented with fixed value, so it is 0 now. You can set it to 100 by y-axis, and all particles will move with velocity vector 0, 100, 0. You can set the random value for starting velocity, and you will have some kind of three-dimensional box which you can tune with these ranges of random ranges for each component. So now velocity vector for each particle is random vector inside this box with such boundaries. The next distribution for this value is random on graph. It is very similar to point mode in start position also. Random value from 0 to 1 will be applied to x-axis, and these 3 graphs will define a velocity vector for that x coordinate, for that random value. And the last 2 distributions will allow you to make a dependency on emitter time and dependency on system time. So you can make some kind of animation depending on that time. The second mode for start velocity is from path. In this mode, velocity for each particle will be selected from vector velocity vector for each particle will be selected from point on the path dependently to 0 position. You can see also distribution over the path. By default it is random value from 0 to 1, so points on the path are selected uniformly and randomly. For example, if this point is chosen, then particle of starting velocity vector will be like this, and this distance the particle will pass in 1 second. Let me change lifetime of particles to 1 second, and they will die on this path. So when you move this path, you can change not only direction but also speed of particles. You can also make such interesting things like this. So particles will fly into opposite sides. Or you can change distribution to achieve some interesting results, like random on graph may change concentration of short particles. I'll make a little more particles. So now with this distribution, particles condensed to the opposite ends of the path. You can condense them to one side or another side, or you can condense them to the center. So most of particles will fly near the center of the path. With the last two distributions you can animate starting velocity vector. For example, like this. Now I will loop the graph and it will loop accordingly. So start velocity from the path is very useful option, and it allows you to create a lot of great things. The next option for start velocity is random 3D. It gives you a random three-dimensional vector with specified length. By default, the length is fixed value, but you can make it random value. Some particles will start with 0 velocity, some with 350. You can make this length random on graph, so you can make non-uniform distributions for length of that random vector, like this. So now the most of particles will start with small velocity, and some of them, less part of them, will start with big velocity. And of course, the last two distributions, over emitter time and over system time, which you can use to animate, to make dependency on time of this length, and achieve some interesting effects too. The next mode is a random 2D, two-dimensional. It's the same as a random 3D vector, but the vector will be in the plane x, o, y. Zero coordinate of that vector will be 0. Z coordinate will be 0. So it also has length and the same set of distributions for the length. Also, you can see two disabled checkboxes. Add emitter's velocity, first one. Let me show you how it works. When it is disabled, speed of effect smoothing makes no influence on the starting vector of particles, and when you turn it on, velocity vector of your effect will be added to starting velocity vector of particles. It doesn't look very natural for steady motion, but it will with motion with forces and some air resistance. The second checkbox is apply emitter's rotation, so I need to switch to start velocity from the path to show you how it works. So if it is switched off, when you move your effect and rotate your effect, there is no difference. But if you turn it on, your path, your starting velocity vector will be rotated with the effect. It is very useful, but also it requires additional computation as well as add emitter's velocity. So if you don't need them, don't turn them on. And the last option, last mode for changing position is motion with forces. It is very similar to steady motion, but velocity vector of particle will be changed by influence of some forces. You can see that you have the same start velocity group, so you can set up start velocity vector in the same way, and there is another one, group forces. You can see that the behavior of particles is changed when we switch to motion with forces. That because by default there is one directed force, like gravitation makes influence on the particles. But let me show you how air resistance works first. The air resistance is a density of the air of the environment where particles move. So the faster particle moves, the bigger force will break it. So if we say set up the density air resistance to 1, you can see that particles slows down. Let me change starting velocity to random 3D, make it a little bigger, and increase lifetime to 4 seconds. Now let's look at the next group where directed force is defined. It is default one. You can delete it. So now you can see that particles just slow down but don't fall down. You can add it back with add force button. Here you can see you can add directed force or turbulence. Let's add directed, and you can change direction of that force with a fixed value by default or um, a lot of different distributions. So directed force is a three-dimensional vector which defines direction where particles are attracted. Length of that vector defines strength of attraction. With fixed value, this is a single vector for all particles. You can direct it down or direct it up, but it will be the same for all particles. You can change it to random values, so for all particles that force will be different and will be selected from a three-dimensional box with specified ranges. Or you can do that with random on graph, where you will specify the force with graph or over particle life. Let me show you a simple example. In this case, you make dependency on normalized particle life. Let me just switch direction of the force in second half of particle's life. So first half particles moves down, and in second part of their life, second half, they start to move up because the force is changed to minus 300 or minus 200. You can do mostly the same but with particle time, where x-axis will show you time in seconds of particle life. You can even make dependency on particle speed. So on x-axis, particle speed will be applied, or you can animate it with emitter time or system time, of course. For example, I will do the same switch of the force, but after 2 seconds of effects playing. Oh, sorry, I chose Z-axis instead of Y-axis. So I'll make it again on Y-axis. So first 2 seconds they will move down, and then they will start to move up. Please note that here is store on particle init checkbox, and if you turn it on, then value of the graph will be stored on particle generation, and changing the value on graph will make no influence on that particle. It will use stored force or stored graph's value, and new graph's value will be applied only for new particles. If we turn it on, then you can see that old particles will have the same force direction until they die, and new force direction will be applied only for new particles. It's not what we expected from this like switch, but it is also very useful in some cases, in some effects. So the second type of force is turbulence. I will delete directed force and leave only turbulence. This type of force allows it to achieve very natural behavior of particles and adds some air turbulence force. It's very hard to explain how turbulence, what is turbulence and how does it work inside the editor, but you can imagine a big three-dimensional cube of turbulence forces or turbulating air. This cube has size 1000. It moves in the space with this speed. It also repeats like texture in the space, and all particles are flying inside of that repeating cubes, and in each point of space some force of this cube makes influence on the particle with this scale. It may be hard to understand, but you need to play a little with these values to understand how they change behavior of particles. So the scale of the turbulence can be represented by plenty different distributions. All of them you already saw in previous my examples. I will just only show you one example with over emitter time distribution. And I will make it in that way where turbulence will be enabled only after 2 seconds of effect. I will restart it again, and you can see that particles have no turbulence first 2 seconds, and then it starts to make influence. With turbulence you can make a lot of great effects. You can check samples. There are a lot of effects using it. But be careful on a big number of particles like 1000. Turbulence can make impact on performance, so you better check your effects on your slowest target devices. So that's it for this tutorial. It was most complex part, most complex section. Further will be much easier, and we have size, rotation, color, transparency and texture grid.